All right, guys. I'm testing out a new software today, so hopefully this goes well. Thanks for joining me on my study of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is Hayden Schaap, and I'm continuing my study of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This has been really fun for me to do. I really love this stuff, so I appreciate you tuning in and just being a part of it, I guess. If you're listening, if you're not, or if you don't like what I'm doing, I don't care a ton, just because I'm doing this with the intent to teach. So as I study with the intent to teach, it's helping me understand the concepts quite a bit better, so that I can then either teach them to others, but more importantly, apply them in my own life, right? Okay, so let's get into this. Is kind of a dope software. I'm trying out this new software for video to have a higher quality capture. Okay. So last time we talked a little bit about the difference between the circle of influence versus the circle of concern. Essentially, and this is in habit 1, be proactive, right? The recap from last week, we'll just read a couple quotes here. So another excellent way to become more self-aware regarding our own degree of proactivity, which is the first step in being able to become more proactive, is to become aware of how proactive we actually already are, right? Is to look at where we focus our time and our energy. So, sorry, my audio was pretty bad there for a second. I apologize. Look at where we focus our time and our energy. And when we do that, then you can divide your time and your energy into, say, like, am I focusing my time and my energy on the things that I can control, on my circle of influence, the things over which I can actually have an influence in my life, or am I focusing my time and energy on my circle of concern? As we look at these things within our circle of concern, it becomes apparent that there are so many things over which we have no real control, and others that we can do something about. Proactive people focus their efforts in the circle of influence. They work on the things they can do something about. The nature of their energy is positive, enlarging and magnifying, causing their circle of influence to increase. Which is just, I love this stuff. This is incredible. They focus on the weaknesses of other people. If you're focused on your circle of concern rather than your circle of influence, then you're focused on the weaknesses of other people and circumstances over which you have no control. Their focus results in blaming and accusing others, reactive language, and increased feelings of victimization. The negative energy generated by that focus, combined with neglect in areas they could do something about, causes their circle of influence to shrink. This is something that I didn't actually catch last time as I was thinking about this, was this idea that when you focus, the problem with focusing on things that you can't control and on focusing your time, efforts, and energy on your circle of concern rather than your circle of influence, the problem with that is that you're not focusing on things you could be proactive about. And so therefore, that's one of the reasons why your influence will actually shrink if you don't focus on that circle of influence, because you're relinquishing or giving away your ability to control outcomes, because you're focused on things that you have no control over. And again, I talked about this last time, and this is why I don't listen to the news. And I become very hesitant as I get attracted to, like, current events, because I have no control over them. But if I focus on my circle of influence, then I could have control over certain events over time. But it's best for me to clean my room first before I try to tell others how to live their life, really, in the words of Jordan Peterson. Okay, so we're going to go to this next part here that I think is really interesting. As long as we are working in our circle of concern, we empower the things within it to control us. We aren't taking the proactive initiative necessary to effect positive change. And then I found this concept interesting, that this can be reversed to where you have your circle of influence is this small ring outside of your circle of concern, meaning you're not being proactive in your own life, but because you have money, influence, fame, etc., you can dangerously have a circle of influence that's much broader than your circle of concern, which is your own personal life. But to the extent you don't have control over those things, and you don't own enough of yourself in a proactive way, or have personal vision to guide your thoughts and your behaviors, you could dangerously be affecting others to place their thoughts, behaviors, attitudes, and I guess focus on things that are not important. Direct, indirect, or no control. Okay, so now we're going to get into some new stuff that we haven't gone over yet. The problem we all face in one of these areas, oh gosh, dude, here's my dyslexia at it again. The problems we face fall in one of three areas. Direct control, problems involving our own behavior. Indirect control, problems involving other people's behavior. Or no control, problems we can do nothing about. Fascinating stuff here. Just adjust this real fast. So, three things, right? We have direct control over problems. We have indirect control, meaning they involve other people's behavior, or we don't have control at all. We can't do anything about them, such as our past or situational realities. The proactive approach puts the first step in the solution of all three kinds of problems with our present circle of influence. Focus is in the right place, right? Direct control problems are solved by working on our habits. They're obviously within our circle of influence. These are the private victories of habit 1, 2, and 3. So the private victory of having personal vision and being able to say, like, what things do I actually value and live according to those values and base those values, decide that I want to base my values on living by true principles, by a north guiding star of morals, of integrity. And then seeking over time to build my life, or at least the first creation of my life, the ideas of my life around that reality of living based on true principles, which is habit 2, building that blueprint, and then executing on that blueprint from day to day, which is habit 3. Those are all the things within my control. And all the direct problems that we face can be solved by focusing on that, our circle of influence, through direct control. Indirect control problems are solved by changing our methods of influence. Oh, this is really interesting. So like if you're used to complaining about people and the things that they do, I often run into this with managers where they'll face a problem. Let's say they have a recruiting problem, and they'll say, hey, I'm just having a really hard time recruiting against this methodology or this certain company in our industry, or I'm having a hard time with this type of person that I'm trying to get to buy into my team. And that's an indirect control problem according to Covey. And the way to solve that, because oftentimes a not very proactive person will relinquish their ability to, they'll just give in to the fact that, like, oh, I can't do anything about this. I remember a couple of years ago, I kept running into, as I was trying to build one of my teams, I kept running into this problem of recruiting against a certain company in our industry that was challenging for me to recruit against because of how persuasive they were with their ideas to the people that I would recruit. I was trying to get them to buy into joining my team, and then I would have this company come along, and I was struggling against them, really. So what I decided, though, is that I was going to make a change in the way that I was messaging the things that I was talking about in order to appeal to the type of person that I wanted to be on my team, that was also persuaded by a lot of the ideas of this other entity that was recruiting them. But I focused on my methods of persuasion, like Covey talks about here. This is really interesting, and that's what people should do if they're struggling with problems that involve other people. So marriage, I think, is one of these, right? But it takes a proactive person to do this, because then you can now start to influence your interdependent relationships. So problems are solved by changing our methods of influence in the indirect control realm. These are the public victories of habit 4, 5, and 6. I have personally identified over 30 separate methods of human influence, as separate as empathy is from confrontation, as separate as example is from persuasion. Most people have only 3 or 4 methods in their repertoire, starting usually with reasoning, and, if that doesn't work, moving to fight or flight. How liberating is it to accept the idea that I can learn new methods of human influence instead of constantly trying to use old, ineffective methods of shape up or ship out, which is oftentimes what I think happens. You see this with parents too, where it's like, yeah, if you don't want to buy in, then like get out. Or I know parents don't say that. I actually had a thought of a way you might parent that is like not focusing on this indirect control method of changing your ability to persuade and influence. And then I had the thought of, if you're like a manager working with someone, or for me, like I work with sales leaders. So if a sales leader is working with someone and is like, yeah, if they don't want to be a part of it, then like they can get out. It's like, that is usually something that someone says who is very not proactive. Now sometimes that's the case, like that has to happen, but oftentimes there are just, I think what Covey's pointing out here is there's a lot of tools that you could use in your toolbox that people don't even tap into to solve indirect control problems. But it starts with developing the ability to persuade and influence yourself, right? No control problems involve taking the responsibility to change the line on the bottom on our face, to smile, to genuinely and peacefully accept these problems. That's really interesting, because he's not saying you can't do anything about them. What he is saying is the thing you can do involves not changing them, but rather changing yourself against them. So like this might be politics, or a stance someone might have with like the COVID vaccine, or like whatever. You can't change the current state of things, but you can change yourself, and you can change how you respond to it, right? And then hopefully that leads to you changing other people too, or being able to, if that's what you desire. Live with them, even though you don't like them. In this way, we do not empower these problems to control us. We share in the spirit embodied in the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer, which I'm familiar with all of this. Not that I was an alcoholic, but I've definitely been in circles where I've needed a lot of these same ideas. Lord, give me the courage to change the things which can and ought to be changed, the serenity to accept the things which cannot be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. Profound, right? Whether a problem is direct, indirect, or no control, we have in our hands the first step to the solution: changing our habits, changing our methods of influence, and changing the way we see our no-control problems are all within our circle of influence. And then from there, he's going to talk a little bit about expanding your circle of influence. And that's actually what I want to focus on my next study. I'm going to spend a lot more time on this tomorrow. I just got back from Orlando yesterday. I spent some time with my wife there over the break, over the holiday, and it was nice. I've been working a lot lately, and it was really nice to surprise Sarah with a trip to Universal. A lot of fun, like super fun. An example of this for me was when we got there. In the forecast, it had the only 2 days, basically in the last 2 weeks and the coming week, the only 2 days where it was raining were the 2 days that we had planned to go to the park. And on top of that, I wanted to go see Star Wars, but because it was such a last-minute surprise for Sarah, we actually couldn't even get tickets to go into the park that I wanted to go into for Disney. So we ended up not doing Disney, only Universal. But one of the things that happened was it was just raining, right? So it was like raining almost the entire time we were there. And this tends to be something where like you could get really bummed out by that, right? Because this is the only time I have to spend with Sarah that's like just me and her, where like I don't have to be worrying about any work crisis problems that I'm avoiding by turning off my phone or whatever. And it's raining the whole time. And so I started thinking about this because I've been studying the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and how proactive people carry their weather with them. And I'm typically, decently good at this compared to most, I would say. But I was like, Sarah, listen, it does not matter what the weather is. Like, we carry our own weather with us, so we're going to have a freaking blast no matter what, okay? I promise you. And then I did my best to make it so that no matter what was happening around us, how long the lines were, how much money we had to spend on this freaking fast passes, that like we were in control of our experience, because there are things we could influence. And we could influence directly what we could do to make it so that our experience was better. Like, I could go buy a fast pass to spend less time in lines. That's a direct. If my problem is I'm not going to spend enough time going on the rides that I want because we're there for a limited amount of time, I can directly influence that by that mechanism, right? If the problem is, someone treats you poorly or looks at you weird in line, then I can directly change the way that I either feel about that or influence that person through persuasion and the methods of communication, for example. Or let's say Sarah is having a hard time. I can directly influence that, not directly, I can indirectly influence that through the way that I choose to help her see the problem as well, and I can employ different methods of persuasion in order to do that. That's an indirect problem, or solution to an indirect problem that's born out of proactivity. And then the third thing is like, I can't change the weather, but I can sure change how I myself react to or feel about it. So those are, it's kind of a blend there of all the three different types of problems and just experience I had with it. And as a result, it was an amazing experience, and we were actually able to enjoy it instead of relinquishing our ability to enjoy our time together to the outside factors like the weather, which we have no control over. So anyway, that's my study of the 7 habits of highly effective people today. A little recap of the study itself. Some of my key takeaways today were, you don't always have, here's the big breakthrough in terms of how to become a proactive person. And this was the insight that I had today, is you don't always have control over your circumstances. In fact, you don't always have control over the problems themselves. But in order to be a proactive person, you have to identify the things that you have direct control over. What can I actually directly change based on my actions? Not just so much your attitudes, but based on my actions and my behaviors. Or it might be an indirect control problem where there are other players involved in the issue or in the problem, or there are other players involved in the achievement of whatever the outcome is. I have to be able to have influence over those people. That's an indirect control scenario. I have to be able to have influence over those people, and I have tons of methods of influence at my disposal in order to change the outcomes and to have control over those outcomes, or at least to increase my likelihood of having control over those outcomes. And then the third, no control. A proactive person, if they have no control over the situation, a proactive person can change their attitudes and their behaviors within that situation so that they see it differently and employ gratitude, empathy, and other things in order to be proactive within their circumstances. So those are the things that my takeaways from my study today. Proactive people either take direct control of the situation when they can. They influence those involved in the situation in order to increase their likelihood of having a higher output or outcome based off of what they want. Or if they have no control over the circumstance whatsoever, and they're able to identify it, by the way, proactive people, if they have no control over the circumstance whatsoever, and it's a no control issue or a no control situation, then they change their attitudes and their behaviors within that situation in order to not allow it to affect or impact their mood or their feelings. As Covey states earlier, they subordinate their feelings or their emotions to their values and the things they value most, and that doesn't impact their experience. Anyway, so just some of my takeaways from my study today. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.